All right, the last set of organic compounds that we're going to learn to name and draw are amines and amides. Now, these are similar to each other, but they're not the same. The only similarity really is that they both contain nitrogen. So this is the first organic compound that we're going to see that contains nitrogen. So let's start off with amines, and I like to think of amines as being ammonia derivatives. So if you have ammonia, which is NH3, so if you imagine this structure to start off with, it makes understanding amines much easier. So ammonia contains one nitrogen with a lone pair, and it's bonded to three different hydrogens. A primary amine, which is one type of amine. Now, this might be very similar to the primary, secondary, and tertiary alcohols that we learned of when we learned about alcohols. But a primary amine is when instead of this ammonia being bonded to this nitrogen being bonded to three hydrogens, it's bonded to at least one carbon. Now, this could be a carbon group, it could be a chain of carbons. For now, I'm just going to write CH3 just to make it easier for you to copy it down. So I've got two hydrogens and one carbon chain. So that's where my primary amine the primary is coming from. This is what a primary amine looks like. A secondary amine, very similarly, instead of it being bonded to one carbon group, it's going to be bonded to two carbon groups. Now, they don't have to be the same as each other. This could be a long carbon chain. This could be another long carbon chain. For now, I'm just going to write it as methyl groups here. And lastly, our tertiary amines are these nitrogens that are bonded to three different carbon groups. So this could be carbon chains or whatever. So all three of these all three of these hydrogens in this ammonia are replaced by carbons. So I've got my primary amine where only one of it is a carbon chain. My secondary where two of them are carbon chains, so 1 and 2, and my tertiary where there's all three of these are carbon chains. Okay, now having learned these different types of amines, let's go into naming this. So this amine this is obviously a primary amine. So there's a 4 carbon chain attached to this NH2. So 1, 2, 3, 4. When I'm naming this, I'm gonna take a look at the number of carbons that I have. So this is butane. And just as we usually do with my alkane name, I'm going to get rid of the E and I'm going to have the ending amine. So this is going to be butanamine. So because you have butane from the 4 carbons and amine from the fact that this is an amine. Okay, what if you have a tertiary amine? How would you name it? So I would use my longest chain comparing all three of these. I'm going to see that this is the longest chain. So this is a methyl group. This is an ethyl. There's 1, 2. This is a propyl. So 1, 2, 3. So my parent is going to be the longest chain here. So this is going to be propanamine. And then for the other two, in order to show that the other two are bonded to the nitrogen, this side group is going to be written as N-methyl. So remember how in the other organic compounds we wrote the number and then the dash and the word, but instead of showing or designating what carbon it's attached to, because it's not attached to a carbon, it's attached to the nitrogen, we're just going to write a capital N. And the same thing for this. So this is going to be N-ethyl. Ethyl. So when I put this name together, it's going to be N-ethyl, N-methyl, propanamine. And this order this is just alphabetical order. So E comes first, then M, and then you have your parent name. Okay, and here we've got another example. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm numbering this so that this N is attached to the lowest possible carbon there. So that would be carbon number 2. That is a 5-chain carbon. Whereas here I've got 1, 2, and 1, 2. So 2 ethyl groups. So my parent chain is going to have 5 carbons. Now the difference here, let's compare this to, let's say, this particular one. The nitrogen is attached to the first carbon within that chain, right? And so was the case here. When we take a look here, this is actually attached to the second carbon in this 5-carbon chain. So just like we do for when we name side groups like that, we're actually going to name it as pentan 2 amine. And that 2 is coming from the fact that it's attached to carbon number 2. So if it was attached to carbon number 3, I would call it pentan 3 amine, right? And everything else, I just name it exactly as I did before. So I've got N-ethyl here and N-ethyl here. And I can combine these two to write it as N-N diethyl pentan 2 amine. Okay, so that was amine naming. Let's take a look at amides. Now, the difference between amines and amides. Amides have a carbonyl, so a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, and this can be attached to or bonded to any sort of carbon group or a hydrogen. It could be something else. And then I've got a nitrogen. So this carbon that's double bonded to the oxygen is also bonded to a nitrogen, which is then bonded to other carbons. Okay, so this general structure here. So if you see a nitrogen and you don't see a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, you're looking at an amine. But if you've got a carbon that's double bonded to an oxygen that's bonded to this nitrogen, then you're looking at an amide. So when you're naming amides, you just have to, again, you don't have to be concerned about the longest chain. You have to be concerned about which one the carbon with the double bonded O, that's going to be carbon number 1 in your parent chain. So 1, 2, 3, 4 in this case. So that is going to be my parent, so butane. But I'm going to get rid of that E at the end of my alkane naming, and I'm going to add the ending amide. So it's going to be butanamide. Okay, and again, that's not based off of which is the longest chain. It's going off of whichever one has the carbon double bonded to it. So that is butanamide. And then I would name my other side groups just like I did for my amines. I'm going to write this as N-methyl, right? Because it's not actually bonded to any carbon, so we can't identify the number of it, but I can identify that it is bonded to the nitrogen, right? And here I've got N-ethyl. Okay, when I put this all together, I'm of course going to put this in alphabetical order. So N-ethyl, N-methyl, butanamide would be this particular structure. Now notice the difference. In amides, your ending is amide, and in amines, your ending is amine. So that kind of stays consistent here. So let's take a look at our second example. I've got, this is carbon number 1, and this is carbon number 2. So that is my parent chain, and that is going to be ethanamide. And then my two side groups are N-methyl and N1, 2, 3, 4, N-butyl. Right, so when putting it together, it's going to be N-butyl. Oh boy, I'm running out of space here. Okay, I'm going to start that again. Okay, so we already saw that the parent chain was ethanamide. So we're going to start with N-butyl, N-methyl. That's supposed to be a dash. N-methyl ethanamide. Squeeze that in there. So that would be how you would name amides.